Hi, my name is Candy Brochu, and this book is called Challenges for Rosie, and it was written by a friend of mine, Janice Hoag Hitchcock, who grew up in Lunenburg. The book is dedicated to Rosie, a male Caribbean flamingo who resided in Dorset, England. He became an ambassador for the Abbots of Swanery. Challenges for Rosie was inspired by some of his real-life challenges. Janice also wrote the book and did the illustrations. Okay. Far away on a small island in the Caribbean, a pair of coral-colored flamingos waited patiently for their chick Rosie to hatch. Both parents took turns sitting on the nest they lovingly built together. The mud and stone mound offered protection for Rosie's fragile, chalky white shell. Neighboring flamingos in the colony loved to socialize together, gossiping and squabbling, wondering when the new arrival would join their community. Then, one day, a small, fluffy ball of feathers appeared beneath one wing of the mother bird. A curious little head with a short, pointed beak peeked around her world above the nest. And there's Rosie in her nest. Rosie was fed a liquid food from her parents that changed her neutral gray and tan feathers into a brilliant color worthy of her name. Time passed slowly for the young flamingo. She became restless sitting in her nest day after day. Rosie grew and gained her strength. She became more independent and was ready to go exploring. She climbed over the muddy barrier and began her wanderings. The little flamingo discovered many exciting things: turtles and crabs and lizards. Rosie's body and legs rapidly grew lanky, and her beak developed a downward curve so she could scoop shellfish and water plants from the shallow water. She soon stood 5 feet tall. Her feathers were a radiant color of crimson. Her wings, tipped with black, were strong enough to carry her anywhere she wanted to go in the Caribbean. She explored all the islands in the area, and with each new journey became more excited to travel farther from home. There was so much to see and learn. She never tired of another new discovery. When Rosie was not exploring, she was thinking. She spent hours on the shore, staring into the distance until sunset, longing to fly over the massive sea that stretched before her. She soon became a celebrity among the visitors who arrived on great cruise ships from faraway places. They gave her food and loved to take her picture. Rosie's dream was to visit their distant homelands. She thought, and she thought, and she thought. Finally, she had a brilliant idea. She decided to fly with a large cruise liner across the Atlantic Ocean. She would always have a place to rest when tired and lots of delicious food scraps to eat from the kitchen staff and the tourists. That settled it for Rosie. She was thrilled. Without delay, she said goodbye to her friends and family in the Caribbean area and departed on a cruise ship at dawn the next day. The boat left port and slowly moved into the open ocean. Each day, Rosie flew miles ahead of the ship to see what new lands lay ahead and returned regularly for food and rest. Then one beautiful day, she decided to fly a little farther from the cruise liner than usual. The breeze was fair, and the immense blue sky was clear, and the sun bathed Rosie in warmth as she continued to fly. She flew and flew and flew. The day passed quickly, and dusk was approaching. Rosie was losing her energy. She flapped her wings again and again, slowly moving through the sky. Finally, in the distance, she saw a large clump of trees, marshes, and fields surrounded by water. She had never seen so many beautiful colors of green in one place. The view looked like a crazy quilt was tossed upon the ocean. She flew closer to the island and realized it was larger than anything she had ever explored in the Caribbean Sea. Darkness was settling in, and Rosie needed food and rest for the night. She soared closer to investigate the situation, circling lower and lower. As she approached a shallow lagoon, she gasped with exhaustion and rapidly dropped to the ground. Crash! Without warning, a group of hissing and snorting swans descended upon her. The angry sounds of attack and the painful cries of being attacked filled the air. Feathers were scattered everywhere. Rosie was stabbed with hard, knobbed beaks, and most of her fluffy covering was torn from her neck and body. Rosie's head lay twisted on the leaves. Weak and cold, she was unable to defend herself. Suddenly, Rosie felt something sweeping through the air, brushing the feathered attackers away. And her tired eyes saw a rather large man clear the area for her survival. There's a picture of the man holding her. She's all snuggled down. He crouched down and carefully scooped Rosie into his arms, cradling her from danger. His warm wool jacket protected her as she snuggled her head and body close to his chest. This kind and gentle man brought Rosie to his cabin and took care of her for many weeks. She slowly regained her health and grew stronger every day. Her feathers grew more radiant than ever before, and she was excited about her future explorations, discovering this newfound land. Rosie learned from her abrupt and unexpected landing that not all creatures are friendly towards strangers from another place. Her acceptance into their territory would take some time and patience. When Rosie was well enough to go exploring, she knew she had to gain the friendship of the local community. She roamed the marshlands curiously and quietly, finding an abundance of food. She was delighted with the many new plants and animals she discovered in the area. Each day, she slowly moved closer to the swans and gradually gained their trust. They no longer feared her because she was different, and she was eventually accepted into their group. As time passed, she became a respected member of the bird colony through her unique and charming personality. She was no longer considered a threat to the swans and their little youngsters called cygnets, who followed her in awe. Rosie never tired of exploring this new place called England and all the other nearby countries. She always returned to the bird refuge to be with her new friends and adopted family. Rosie decided to spend the rest of her life with a kindly caregiving ranger who unselfishly saved her life. Here's a picture of her flight across the ocean. And that's the end of the story about Rosie and her challenges.
Hi kids, this is Uncle Pete going to be reading to you today. The story that you just heard was very special to me. It was written by a former student of mine and read by another former student who were both in the first class I ever taught here in school 56 years ago. And here we are back again together reading to you kids. The story I'm going to read today is a story called The Bear That Wasn't by Frank Tashlin. My mother read this story to me. I read it to my children, and the next generation, you, is going to hear it now. It's a great story about a bear that people told wasn't a bear, but knew he was all along. Once upon a time, in fact, it was on a Tuesday, the bear stood at the edge of a great forest and gazed up at the sky. And way up high, he saw a flock of geese flying south. Then he gazed up at the trees of the forest. The leaves had turned all yellow and brown and were falling from the branches. He knew that when the geese flew south and the leaves fell from the trees, that winter would soon be here and snow would cover the forest. It was time to go into a cave and hibernate. And that was just what he did. There's the bear, sleeping away in a cave, whiling away the winter. Not long afterward, in fact, it was on a Wednesday, men came, lots of men, with charts and maps and surveying instruments. They charted and mapped and surveyed all over the place. Then more men came, lots of men with steam shovels and saws and tractors and axes. They steam shoveled and sawed and tracted and axed all over the place. They worked and worked and worked, and finally they built a great, big, huge factory right over the top of the sleeping bear's cave. The factory operated all through the cold winter, and then it was spring again. Deep down under one of the factory buildings, the bear awoke. He blinked his eyes and yawned. Then he stood up sleepily and looked around. It was very dark. He could hardly see. Then he saw a light in the distance. "Oh, there's the entrance to the cave," he said, and yawned again. He walked up to the stairs to the entrance and stepped out into the bright spring sunshine. His eyes were still only half opened, as he was still very sleepy. But his eyes didn't stay open, half open long. They suddenly popped wide apart. He looked straight ahead. Where was the forest? Where was the grass? Where were the trees? Where was the forest? What had happened? Where was he? Things looked so strange, he didn't know where he was. But we do, don't we? We know that he was right in the middle of the busy factory. "I must be dreaming," he said. "Of course, that's it, I'm dreaming." So he closed his eyes and pinched himself. Then he opened his eyes very slowly and looked about. The big buildings were still there. It wasn't a dream, it was real. Just then a man came out of a door. "Hey, you, get back to work," the man said. "I'm the foreman, and I'll report you for not working." The bear said, I don't work here. I'm a bear." The foreman laughed very loud. "That's a fine excuse for a man to keep from doing any work, saying he's a bear." The bear said, "But I am a bear." The foreman stopped laughing. He was very mad. "Don't try to fool me," he said. "You're not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the general manager." The bear said, "No, you're mistaken. I am a bear." The general manager had one secretary, one telephone, and one wastebasket. And he was very mad, too. He said, "You're not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the third vice president." The bear said, "I'm sorry to hear you say that. You see, I am a bear." The third vice president had 2 secretaries, 2 telephones, and 2 wastebaskets. And he was even madder. He got up out of his chair and said, "You're not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the second vice president." The bear leaned over his desk and said, But that isn't true. I am a bear, just a plain, ordinary, everyday bear." The second vice president was more than mad or madder. He was furious. he had 3 secretaries, 3 telephones, and 3 wastebaskets. He pointed his finger at the bear and said, "You are not a bear. You are a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the first vice president." "Who, me?" the bear asked. "How can you say that when I am a bear?" The first vice president had 4 secretaries, 4 telephones, and 4 wastebaskets. He yelled in a rage. He said, "You're not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat. I'm going to take you to the president." "Oh no," the bear said, "not that. This is a dreadful error, you know, because ever since I can remember, I've always been a bear." The president had 5 secretaries, 5 telephones, and 5 wastebaskets with lovely tassels on them. "Listen," the bear told the president, "I don't work here. I'm a bear. And please don't say I'm a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat, because the first vice president and the second vice president and the third vice president and the general manager and the foreman have told me that already." "Thank you for telling me," the president said. "I won't say it, but that's just what I think you are." The bear said, "I'm a bear." The president smiled and said, "You can't be a bear. Bears are only in a zoo or a circus. They're never inside a factory. And that's what you are, inside a factory. So how can you be a bear?" The bear said, "But I am a bear." The president said, "Not only are you a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat, but you're also very stubborn. So I'm going to prove it to you once and for all that you are not a bear." The bear said, "But I am a bear." And so they all got into the president's car and drove to the zoo. You kids probably have been to zoos. It's a place where there's all sorts of animals, and this is where a bear ordinarily would be. If you've ever seen a bear, that's probably where he is, unless he was running around the streets of Lunenburg somewhere. "Is he a bear?" the president asked the zoo bear. The zoo bear said, "No, he isn't a bear, because if he were a bear, he wouldn't be outside the cage with you. He would be inside the cage with us." The bear said, But I am a bear." A little baby zoo bear said, "I know what he is. He's a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat." And all the zoo bears laughed. "Silly man." The bear said, "But I am a bear." And so they all left the zoo and drove 600 miles away to the nearest circus. Some of you kids might have been to a circus, all kinds of shows, but that's also where bears go to be performers in a big, big circus. "Is he a bear?" the president asked the circus bears. The circus bears said, "No, he isn't a bear, because if he were a bear, he wouldn't be sitting in a grandstand seat with you. He would be wearing a little hat with a striped ribbon on it, holding onto a balloon, and riding a bicycle with us." The bear said, "But I am a bear." One little baby circus bear said, "I know what he is. He's a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat." And all the circus bears almost fell off their bicycles laughing. The bear said, "But I am a bear." And they left the circus and drove back to the factory. And the president told the first vice president, who told the second vice president, who told the third vice president, who told the foreman, who told the bear to get to work. And so they put the bear to work on a big machine with a lot of other men. The bear worked on the big machine for many, many months. All day long the bear pushed buttons. All day long the bear turned wheels. All day long the bear pulled levers. All day long the bear cranked cranks. Push buttons, turn wheels, pull these, levers, crank, 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 crank. One day, a long time afterward, the factory closed down, and all the workers left and went home. The bear walked along far behind them. He was all alone and had no place to go. And as he walked along, he happened to gaze up at the sky. And away up high, he saw a flock of geese flying south. And then the bear gazed up at the trees. The leaves had turned all yellow and brown and were falling from the branches. The bear knew when the geese flew south and the leaves fell from the trees that winter would soon be here and snow would cover the forest. It was time to go into a cave and hibernate. So he walked over to a huge tree that had a cave hollowed out beneath its roots. He was just about to go into it when he stopped and said, But I can't go into a cave and hibernate. I'm not a bear. I'm a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat." So winter came. The snow fell. It covered the forest, and it covered him. He sat there shivering with cold, and he said, "But I sure wish I was a bear." And here's the poor bear sitting there, all covered with snow, icicles dripping from his nose, and being very, very, very cold and unhappy. The longer he sat there, the colder he became. His toes were freezing, his ears were freezing, and his teeth were chattering. Icicles covered his nose and chin. He'd been told so often that he was a silly man who needed a shave and wore a fur coat that he felt it must be true. So he just sat there, because he didn't know what a silly man who needed a shave and wore a fur coat would do if he were freezing to death in the winter. The poor bear was very lonely and very sad. He didn't know what to think. Then, suddenly he got up and walked through the deep snow toward the cave. Inside, it was cozy and snug. The icy wind and cold, cold snow couldn't reach him here. He felt warm all over. He sank down on a bed of pine boughs, and soon he was happily asleep and dreaming sweet dreams just like all bears do when they hibernate. So, even though the foreman and the general manager and the third vice president and the second vice president and the first vice president and the president and the zoo bears and the circus bears had said he was a silly man who needed a shave and wore a fur coat, I don't think he really believed it. Do you? No, indeed. He knew he wasn't a silly man, and he wasn't a silly bear either. And if anyone ever tells you you're something you're not, you know what you are. Remember the bear story.
Thank you for watching Lunenburg Storytime, the books we love. If you'd like to get involved and become a reader, we'd love to have you come into our studio and read a book that you love. Our contact information is lunenburgaccess@gmail.com. So send us an email today and let us know if you'd like to become a reader. Thank you.